Well, good morning, everyone. Today is February the 27th, 2015, and this is WX Live webinar number 140 with Professor Glenn Rathke. He's going to be doing a WebDev for Noobs class, and he's got a lot of good stuff to show us this morning. So it's all yours, Glenn.
Well, good morning, everybody. As Tim just said, we'll do this for newbies. And first off, I'll want to say that the material we'll be looking at is part of our training course. So I'll put a plug in here just once, and it's available at www.wxtraining.us. And for WX Live listeners, there's a 20% discount code, and the code is WX Live. So that being said, let's delve into WebDev. And what I'd like to do, depending on how many people we have and questions to those things and who all's here, is we'll start going through some of this information and ideas and see if people have got questions, newbie questions, and if Andy's around or Pete's around, if they've got anything to chime in, we can try and handle what newbies are experiencing.
So if we say WX Live 3 times, do we get 60% off?
Maybe off of your off of your services. which brings up a good point. I give the basic training that we have for all the platforms, and then Andy and Pete really take some of this material to the next level. So these two guys are a great resource also.
And occasionally we throw it back at him and say, hey, you know, we'd like to have this. So
exactly, and that's kind of where we're at now. They'll come up with an idea and they say, hey, how about this? And I'll start it, and they'll take it to the next level. So anyway, let's get started here. I've got the WebDev open, as you can see. But the first thing that I want to talk about, where our programs start, is in the analysis. So let me just go ahead and click on the analysis over here. And we'll bring this up and see. And so our analysis is our repository where we maintain our data. Okay, so whether it's a web app or a desktop or a mobile, we have this repository where we have our tables defined. And we either define new tables here if you're using Hyperfile, or we bring them in from external databases such as SQL Server, Postgres, or Oracle. And really the only thing I want to say here in the analysis is the more complete that you can make this and answer the prompts and the different properties and define links between tables or files, the easier it is for you to work within your application if you're taking advantage of the analysis. And in the beginning, I wholeheartedly suggest that you do that. So tip number one is start with the analysis and then also make sure that it's as complete as possible. So I'm really not going to go into depth in the analysis here, but we do take advantage of it to a great extent. And then over on the right-hand side here, you'll see that we've got the analysis listed. We now have the project tree listed over here. And what I like to do is if I have a lot of pages or screens, I will make all the different folders in here so I can keep like functionality together, okay, because we may have multiple screens and why have them shown all over the place. So I put everything in folders. So those are just two of my very beginning tips that we have here to help categorize your application. Now, as we go through this with the training materials, everything in here is keyed to the manual, so it's all different topics that we talk about. And let me just run this at first, and you'll see how everything that we had on the right side of the project tree is actually in a menu control up here, pretty much. Now, the WX materials, WINDEV, WebDev, mobile, pretty much are all the same environment, and really, as far as we're concerned, for the most part, we're doing data access almost all the time exclusively. There's times that you'll have it where you don't have an analysis or you're not doing much with data. So what our training materials and what we'll talk about here quite a bit actually happens to do with data access. And we'll start off from a very simple point of looking at a table to maybe making it more complex with filtering. And again, As we go through this, just remember, these are some of the things that the platforms let you do for getting to the data. So let me just quickly show you a couple that we have here. When you're starting off just learning WinDev or WebDev, what you want to do is use a table that returns your data. That's the easiest way to display your data. So let's take a look at this. And in WebDev, we have both Ajax tables and HTML tables. And basically, the difference between the two is Ajax gives us that desktop look and feel, kind of like. So it gets closer to your desktop presentation, how things work and what people expect to do. So let's just click on the Ajax. And you'll see that it loaded the data rather quickly, but then again, it is a very, very small data set. But in here is we now can scroll through our data in our tables and move our columns, and we can go and we can select a record and we can edit this just like we would do for a desktop application. Now, let me also show you and I'm still having problems getting to my menu here. HTML. And let's just look at HTML. And you'll notice now we don't have scroll bars here, but we do have the pager control. Now, in my experience, the HTML representation of your data loads considerably faster than doing the Ajax, but the Ajax gives you more functionality. Okay? So I'm going to stop this. And let's go and look at what a table control looks like. Okay, so you'll notice we'll go back to data access table browse. We'll go to our Ajax table. Okay, and so here's that table that's on the form or on the page. We'll bring it up. We'll double click on it. And for the newbies, let me just digress just a bit. You'll notice that we have 8 tabs on the left-hand side. This is the paradigm that we use within all of WinDev, WebDev, and mobile. And every object that we have, well, almost every object, every visual object we have has this tab paradigm, starting at the project where we define everything. So there's pretty much one window that we go to for all the properties, for the look and feel that we have for the controls, the objects. You'll notice that we have the table name. Okay, and when I have the table name highlighted, you will then see that all the tabs on the left-hand side pertain to the table itself as the general control. However, if we select a column, now all the tabs on this left-hand side are pertaining to the column itself. Okay, so let's just go back, select the table, and you'll notice down here at the cursor we have an operating mode. Okay, and here's where we define this mode as classic or Ajax or just purely browser-based. And here's the difference. Classic is the HTML version where we're not using any Ajax. And naturally here with Ajax, we've got this selected. This is what gives us our scroll bars and not having to use a pager control. And then browser is where we actually code everything on the browser side. Now, inherent in that is the browser table does not know anything about data that's sitting out on our server. We have to code all of that. The upside to that is it can be a very fast response time for your users if you're going through a lot of data. Of course, the caveat is you have to figure out how to get the data and have the browser aware of what's happening on the server. Which brings up a point. When we're talking WebDev, pretty much what happens on the browser, the server knows nothing about, and the server knows nothing about the browser. Now, what PCSoft has done for us at a high level here with WebDev Dynamic is it is now extended to us that desktop look and feel, and also the server and the client here are aware to some extent of what's happening between the two. We also have at that high level for WebDev the AWP, which is similar to ASP or PHP in that once the server dishes the information to the client, they're basically disconnected. They don't know anything about each other, and so you have to maintain all of this. As we go through this example, we're using dynamic because it is stops us from having to do sessions and maintaining all those variables, because the WebDev application server maintains all of that for us. It knows when we receive data, it knows what data it's given to us. When we select a row, it knows what row we're on. So when we go to edit data, we're sitting on that row. Okay, back to our table control here. We talked about the operating mode that we just showed here. At this point, we also have a GUI and all these different things that are available to us of how the table looks and how it behaves.
Hey, Glenn.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
And if it's one of those questions that requires a long answer, don't worry about it right now. But could you explain what in your design would dictate which version you would choose, whether you would use dynamic or classic or PHP or whatever?
Yeah, I can't address PHP too much outside of, because I haven't used it, but if you have your business rules person says we're doing this with PHP because that's just what we're doing, then you would have to use that.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you a couple of reasons. If you cannot get or do not have your own WebDev server or unable to get one set up, the first site I put together was PHP by itself because that was the only way to get a website up and running on the hosting engine I had. That was one reason.
Good point.
And it worked. Everything worked on it, speed, data, the whole 9 yards, but it wasn't as robust as what WebDev could build. Okay? Now, the biggest thing I can talk about right now is the difference between either using classic or non-classic WebDev. Classic is much faster for larger database or larger selections. It's much faster, especially in a looper. It's much faster. But you're going to have to take control of a lot of the Ajax stuff with it. If you use the other one, use very small record sets. Otherwise, changes to the looper data or things like this would literally take much longer than what you wish for it to.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. The other thing that we can look at with classic or AWP is if you're going to be having tons of users, and I'm not quantifying what tons means, but it means a lot, because what happens in that instance is as soon as a request is made to the server, it sends the information back and your session is terminated at that point on the server. That connection is terminated. So then when you're ready to submit the data, that connection is established back, and as soon as you're finished, it disappears from the server. So at any one point, you're not using anywhere near the amount of resources on the server, as opposed to the non-AWP or the automatic. And that handles less users. And really, the amount of users, according to PC Soft, that they handle on their application server is hardware-based. It all depends how much memory you have and how large a hard drive you have. The other thing that it also gives us is we've got, it maintains everything for us, which means your connection is established and stays persistent until you're finished with the application or it times out. So as you have users being added to your application, you'll see that in your list. I mean, so you could have a couple hundred users on there at one time. And depending how much hardware you have is how good of a response that you'll get. But what's nice is we just don't have to worry about maintaining the record set or where we're at, what's the last thing we did, because it's just as if it were a desktop application. Okay. All right, back to our table control. We're just looking at some of the basics that we have. And as far as WebDev is concerned, really at this point, our biggest thing that we had is we're going to tell it whether it's classic, Ajax, or browser. Now, Andy had mentioned we want to work with a small record set, and that's certainly true. Just because when you go through an Ajax table and you're wanting to scroll data, it's just not as smooth as if it were in a desktop. So yes, we'll want to limit data, and in just a little while we'll look at a couple different ways of limiting record sets that we have coming back to our table controls. Okay, so we'll look at here a couple things, and we can go back and look at the table. What we have a property called the stored item, and we'll go back and look at this on the table. We'll go to content. First of all, we've got a browsed file. This is where the data comes from. And so we're going to look at either using a table directly to, well, there's a few different ways. A table directly returning our data. And if that's what we're going to do, then we need to limit those records. And we would use something called hfilter, which hopefully we'll look at shortly. Another way that we can do this is instead of using a browse file, just the table itself, we can actually point it to a query. And queries are a great way to graphically design what you want your record set or how you want it to be returned. You just build that graphically. We can also set, because we'll see up top here, which is by programming variable or file, we can also set it to a variable. And Andy has done a great job of taking the traditional way that we approach this class, and he's made his into classes, and we'll have an array of structures, which we can talk about later, or even at another time, or go back to some of Andy's talks. So that's another way of looking at this data. And another way is by programming, where you will return the data yourself in a record set, and you can loop through it if you like and do a table add line to get the data in the table. Now, we have something called a stored item, and there's a couple different uses how we'll do this. Stored item is when you refer to the table, what value are you going to get back out of the table? So if you refer to the table just by the name, if we use what I've got to do here is let me open this up. Okay, if we use the default value for stored item, which is actually nothing, let's go back in here. By default, it returns the row number to us. And the row number is handy if we're wanting to work with or know what specific row is being returned from the table at that time. Otherwise, you can return any other column that you want out of here. Now, what you might be doing most of the time is using the sysid. That way, when you refer back to the table, you'll actually know the sysid, primary key, whatever you're returning, what the value is for that record. So that becomes handy if you need to do some other lookup on that data or you need to pass it to a maintenance form. Then we have search item. And search item basically is the order that it's being sorted on. And you'll notice that we can sort on any column that we have in here. Okay? And then we can actually say if it's in reverse order or not. We also notice up top that we have where all the records are loaded in memory, or we can do direct access. We can do direct access with no limit. And of course, we need to be careful with this. If you're doing Ajax and you're doing direct access, no limit, and you scroll through that, you can take the hit, and you'll see that it gets rather slow. Loaded in memory, we need to be careful how many records we're going to be loading, as you'll have to wait for all of them to load in memory. So there's a balance between of how you want to handle the data in your table and how you're retrieving it. In my example here, since I'm not doing any filtering, and if I had 1 million records, well, that's not a good thing to do here. Okay. Are there any questions from some of the newer folks in the group that are looking for something specific or pertains to what we've covered?
I don't see any questions yet, Glenn.
Okay. Maybe that's good or bad. I don't know. Let's go and take a look at the next way is to take the data, and in the training materials, as we start with the same table and we're going to move it up just one notch, we're going to put an H filter on our records. And let's just go run this. Okay, let's see, H filter. So notice we've got the same looking table here. I want to, let's see, who can I turn? A Berliner. And there it brings back all those records. And again, you can see it's rather quick to bring back the data. I do have to say, PCSoft has done with all of their tools such a great job of presenting new tools to us and different features. And so to be able to take your concept of a desktop application, move it to a web, is both good and bad. They've given us the traditional look and feel of a desktop and how it works, and it's nice. That may not always be the best case of handling things. In our class here, to make it simple, and as long as we're working with small data sets, I keep it very similar to our desktop. But we have to remember, web application, even though we have WebDev and it makes it simple, we need to really think through, is the paradigm of using what you do on a desktop really pertain to what you want to do on the web? Okay, you need to take a hard look at that. And that's why we're thinking here, and as Andy had mentioned, is we need to actually do small record sets. And so it's up to you to decide how many records you want to return when you're first starting your page here. Maybe there aren't any records in the table at all. Maybe you remember the last sort or search that you did and show that. But let's take a look and see how we create an H filter, and that's based on a table. So let me just stop this. And let's see. First of all, let's go back over to that H filter. Browse, here we go. Okay, so you'll notice that we have 4 fields that I'm filtering on. And so the more data that you wanted to filter on, the more fields and the more coding that you have to do. Well, we do have a way around that later, because I just get tired of having to, every time I add a field, add more code. So in its basic, in its simplicity, okay, and for you newbies, whenever you're on a control, if you want to go look at the code that's behind the control, if you select the control and do F2, it takes you there directly. Okay? So, in its simplest form, this is how you filter your table. This is one of the ways of filtering it. And as usual, PCSoft has given us multiple ways of being able to do filters. I'm using a generic, and probably the most robust way of doing this is we say H filter, we give it the table, and then we give it a string. And all I'm simply doing up here is I'm checking to see if any of my 4 fields have a value in there. I'm going to build a filter string. And that's pretty much equivalent, not exact, but it's close to what a where clause is in SQL. Without the where. You just say occupation equals this or last name equals this, and you can put ands and ors in there, and you can put likes by using the %sign. And when you get the whole thing built, you just do an H filter, and that returns your data. Now, if you have a query, and there's multiple ways of doing queries, and we'll look at that next, I believe, you can even do an H filter on a query. So H filters are very powerful. And there's always a debate up of which ones are faster, an H filter or a query. And I think it really depends what you're doing with that. If you're going to have a filter that's based on one table and a primary key, it's very fast. If you're doing other fields, it may not be quite as fast, and a query may be faster. Now, the one thing that's nice about queries is that you have a graphical representation of what that looks like. The bad side or the downside is if you're using 100 windows and you have 100 different queries multiple ways, you may have 100 queries or 200 queries, and you have to maintain them. There is always a plus and minus, but PCSoft gives us multiple ways of being able to filter or retrieve our data or do something. Okay. Now, I'm noticing here one of my items that I talk about is filter code in table initialization. Now, I want to step back just briefly and talk about initialization order. And this is pretty much the same for WINDEV, WebDev, and mobile. In that, and let's look at this page, and I'll select F2. The first thing that happens in a page is we have a global declaration. So you would declare your variables here. There is coding that you can put here, but usually I just use it for declarations. And then after that is happened, all the controls on my page here are initialized. So if I would look at any particular control, this initialization would happen, and then any others would happen. When all the controls then are initialized, we will then come back and we will actually do this code here, the initialization of the page itself. Okay, and you'll notice, okay, and where this is just slightly different than WinDev is we not only have our code that happens with the desktop on the server, okay, but now because we're talking web, we also have browser code. And the two are pretty much not related to each other. One doesn't know what the other is doing, although there are ways around that. Okay, so that's the initialization order that we have. The form loads our global declarations as a run. We put in all our global, maybe some code. All the controls are then loaded and initialized. And of course, there's an initialization order of when that happens. And then we come back, and then it's the page or the window initialization itself. And there's where you can actually go and address each of the controls if you need to do something with them after that. So that's how we do initialization. That's how we do H filters on tables. Now, let me just show you what's also possible here. We'll run the same, the next example, data access, H filter, and let's do, well, I only have that one here, I guess. Okay. Let me see here, H filter conditional. Nope, we'll just leave it the same. Okay, now let's go and look at another way to filter our data, and that is with a query. And so as we have been running our project from the menu, and you'll notice that we have been doing it from the second Go button here, the green one, that runs the complete project. Now, if we have a particular window open that we want to run, we can select the first Go button. And so it doesn't have to run the whole project. But what it does is whatever code we have in the very beginning of our project, which would be the project initialization, it will run. So whenever you start your application as a web app, or you're running it in test mode, and you're running the whole application from the second Go button, or you're going to run a specific window from the first Go button, whatever you have here in project, under project code, this is all going to run first, always, okay? And so this is a good place if you're using global variables, and I couch that in saying, if you're going to. Be very judicious in how you're going to be using global variables, okay? But that's a program design. Okay, so let's go back to the query. Okay, and so you see that this looks the same as the previous one with the H filter. And if you remember all the code that we had in H filter, wasn't a lot, but it was substantial. If we come over here now and look at this query, we have much less code. Again, we do have code for each field, but I'm not having to build any string at all to present a filter. And in fact, we did the H filter where you actually initialize that filter to run. We don't even have to do that with the query because this is the head of the query to be run for that table. So let's go look just a point and to show you what we've got here. You'll notice that it's called query people get. Okay, so in the first one with the table and with the H filter, we were going directly against the underlying table. In here, we're going to go against the query. So let's go take a look at query people get. And so we'll scroll down here, we'll go to queries. We'll go to query people get. Okay, and let's see, query description. I might not be able to do that in here. Let's look at the SQL for this. When you graphically build a query, it will generate the SQL for you, which is really cool in that if you know nothing about SQL, it will generate it for you. And it does a very good job, but I'm sure there's times that it just doesn't handle complex queries. Andy and Pete have come across things that they write. Of course, they are the SQL gurus of our group, and so they can get the query editor, I'd say, kind of confused. But for people like me who do small to medium things, this works well. Now, we tell the query all the fields we want to return, okay? And then we tell it where it's coming from, and then we give it parameters. And as I had said, the query builder will build this for us. Now, what I want you to notice here is I pretty much am putting some kind of parameter on every field that I might possibly want to be able to query on. What's nice with this is if you do not use the parameter. So say we have 10 parameters and you're only going to search on last name, so you give it that value. It only uses that one parameter and it ignores the rest. So if I'm going to say, like I had said, the last name, but I'm going to use last name contains, I can actually do a generic search this way and it ignores all the other parameters. You'll notice that I not only can do a parameter on one parameter on the field, we can do multiple parameters. Now, what that means is use one and only one, but it gives you a nice varied way of being able to filter data. So here at this high level, we've created a filter, okay, a query, excuse me, and we've used it over here in the table, and you'll see that each of the columns is linked to a field in that query. Right? Now, I also want to go back. Let me just show this to you again. If you notice this, we are concatenating the last name and the first name when we're returning it as full name. Okay? We go back to the query, or the table here, table control, and we look at full name. You'll notice, well, I'm actually building this one here, so that's not a good example, but I could have linked it to full name right here, okay, but I didn't.
Blatant plug for classes is much easier in there.
There you go. there you go. Okay, so we put in these values. We then come down into the table control. We check to see if there's a value or not. And if there is a value, we're actually going to put that into the parameter. So that parameter, where is the squirrely brace, the squiggly brace, that's what's between those two squiggly braces. That is the name of the parameter, and that's how we refer to it. So if I have something in L name, right, I'm going to use it what's in here. Otherwise, I'm going to say, hey, going to make it null, and what null means is just ignore this parameter. Don't even use it. So that way I can run this multiple times. I could check to see if there's a last name, and then the next time I could check to see if there's a different field. And if they've not filled in last name, I want to say, let's ignore it this time. So that's all that's involved with using queries. It's rather simple, but very, very powerful. Okay. Now, when you do this, in fact, let's step back just a bit here. When we look at a table control, and we, as in our first example, first two, with the H filter and just the table, if you have your, in fact, let's go run this. and I'll explain what's happening. Now, data access, table browse, Ajax. We'll just do this. We select a record. Since we're running in automatic mode, the application server knows our data set, and when I go to edit this, it knows what record I'm sitting on. So I do not have to go reread that record, although it may be a good idea to do that to make sure that you have fresh data, but it knows the record that we're sitting on. So as soon as we go from the browse table control window or page to a maintenance window or page, we automatically have our data. Now, to get the data to show up when you get on this maintenance page, you have to do a file to screen or file to page, depending what you're working with. If you're designing your application and you've got your record highlighted, you go to your maintenance page and you know you've got data but you don't see anything, more than likely you have forgotten to code in your file to page or file to screen. Now, also, when you go to save your data, if it hasn't been saved and you know that you've got changes there, you more than likely have not done screen to file or screen to page. So those are two things to look at. And as we're talking about those two commands, file to screen, screen to file, I think in the very beginning, I found it useful, well, I don't do that anymore, but I found it useful to have it generate the code. Now, back in the day, it generated tons of code. And so much of it was really useless and didn't need it, and it was really bloated. What code that they're generating now is really much less, and it's just a good way to learn and see the syntax and see what's happening. Okay. Let's go take a look then at let's extend this just a bit to kind of show you some neat things here. So not only is this just trying to give you some pointers for the newbies and expose you to some of these things, but also the possibility of things that you can do. And I'm hoping as you see some of these later when you're looking at designing programs, you go, oh yeah, I remember you can do these kind of things, and then you go back and look at maybe the training material and say, yeah, here's how we did it. I'm just taking this basic query and we're going to go to an extended. But again, as I'm looking here on my points that we cover, I had just said in our table control and the H filter, when you're sitting on there, you go to your maintenance form, you're actually on that record. Well, when you're using a query, what's happening is you're looking at a window. It's like a view, in the back end of a SQL database. It's not the actual table itself. You're just looking at a window over that data. And so if you were going to be querying on a query, but then when you go to your maintenance form, you want to work directly with the data. We now have to either have a query for adding, editing, and deleting records, which I'm not saying we should do. I'm just saying that is a way of doing this. Or we just have to read the underlying data as we get to the maintenance form. That's why when we had the stored item of the primary key, if my table control here is using that for the query, then when I get to the maintenance form, I can just do an hread first, hread seek first, or hread seek. Give it the name of the table in the database, give it the name of the primary key, give it a value, and it will return that record for us. So at that point, we would be in the exact same position as if we were working with a regular table. And I'll go here and let's just run this, and we can look at some code to see that possibly. Oh, okay. Access, query browse, underlying table. Okay. So this looks like our query that we had before. Let's do all. Brings back our records, and we'll show what we're doing with this. But what we've taken and we've extended this just a bit is we now can say, hey, when we do our searching, we want to do a starts with, or we want to do a contains, or we want to do an order by on these columns. So let's search on ERL, and let's do a contains on that, and let's see what records we find. So there it found Berliner, okay? So just remember, these are things we can do, and this ties back directly, okay, to our query, and we'll go back and look at that to show what we're doing again. Now, we have this record here, and we're going to go to our table, or our maintenance form, excuse me. We're going to edit this, and you'll see it brings back the record. So at this position, we are in the same point as if we were working with just a regular table and not a query for the table control. So let's just take a look at this. So let's go up here. Okay. We're going to go edit this. We look at this. And what you'll notice is I'm checking if table select count. So I don't want them going to edit a record if nothing's highlighted. So I just check to see if something's selected. And there's a couple different ways of doing this. We use table select count. You'll notice that we're going to do a page display, and I'm going to send the call sysid. Now, we talked about having the stored item store your primary key. May be or may not be a good thing. What I found possibly happens is you may say that I want the primary key stored there, and that's great and everything's working. Another developer comes in later not realizing that you're relying on that, and they make it default so they can work with the row number. So I'll also keep the primary key just as a column in the table. That way, no matter what is selected as the stored property or the stored value, stored item, I can get it from the table, okay? And now when we go over to this table, and actually, or window, if I highlight or put my cursor here in the code and do F2, it takes me directly to the window, that new window, okay? And here, when we're in the window, here is where I'm actually doing that hreadseek first, okay? hreadseek will work fine because it's a primary key, will return back only one value.
Hey, Glenn.
Yes.
Could you make your text a little bit bigger, please?
Oh, sure. Better? Okay.
There we go. Looks good.
Good, good, good.
I want to add one thing to that, choosing whether you want a default value coming back or leaving it as default. Okay. For the most part, you always on a combo box or something like that choose a value coming back.
Yep.
On tables and loopers, I would use it as an exception, not as a general rule. And the reason why is that if you're using a query or you're using an array, as we do in the classes, it is also the record in the array or the record in the query that you're currently on. So by not returning the ID or the sysid of that, if you need to have it as I'm on the 5th record of the table or the 17th record of the table, then you've got some abilities to do some colorization on the columns, colorization on the deal when you're doing going through the display, because you can use the table itself as your index, whereas if you haven't returned a value, you cannot.
Right. Well, and a good thing to do here is when you're actually checking to see and you want the primary key, you can actually go in and save in a variable what your stored item is. You can change it to what you want it to be to get your value back. And then you can restore it back to that previous value. So no matter what somebody has done to you in that table, you can get what you need and restore it back to what they've used. So that's a possibility too. The other thing that you can do, which is kind of nice, is when you're wanting to get the row that you're on, is you can actually refer to it as the table name, and then within square brackets, give it the table name again, and it will return the row back to you, even though it's set up as a primary key for the stored item or stored value. So as Andy's pointing out, really, there's multiple ways of doing things, and there's multiple reasons of why you may want to do it one particular way. Okay, let's go back and let me just quickly look at this table again. And you'll notice, remember when we talked about whether it's going to be starts with or contains, let's go back and revisit that query people get. And you'll notice, here's my starts with, contains, and likes. So depending how I'm working with my checkboxes, and I make sure one and only one starts with or contains, because I don't want to do both of them. Since I have 3 parameters and I'm only going to use one of them, this becomes very powerful. So with one query, I can handle multiple ways of doing this. So it's really nice is if you know up front that you're going to be querying your table different ways, even from different screens, because the nice thing about the queries is they are global to our project. So you can use these on multiple windows just by adding additional parameters. And if you don't use them, it just ignores them, which is kind of nice. This is kind of a cool thing also, is you can actually change your sort order. And remember we had ascending or descending in that extended window. And so we can just actually supply a value to it, ASC or DESC. Or sort by, I can actually do both of them. This is ASC, but this is the column that we're doing. So there's multiple ways. Just a handy way of having a dynamic sort based on columns in a table. And you could have 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. You just build it yourself. Okay? Any questions? Anybody there who's got experience that would, or ideas that would help newbies?
Don't have any questions on this side.
Okay. Let's yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at joined tables. And so let's go run this. See if I can. There's 2 ways. Well, there's multiple ways. And let me just step back just for a second. We showed doing tables just on a table control based on a table control based on an H filter, table control based on a query. I'm just kind of skipping over the programming, although we could go back and maybe even do this at another time. But a combination of that with the programming and other ways is we can actually build our own SQL statement that we haven't covered on the fly. So if you are really good at SQL and you want to do something complex, you could build it yourself, and we could actually do an H-execute SQL query. So far, we've pretty much been using H-execute query, just automatic in the background. We have H-execute SQL query. And what that becomes handy is if you hand code your SQL statements, you can actually run that. And so if you have SQL that pertains to a specific backend, such as SQL Server or Oracle, or something that's out of the ordinary that WinDev, WebDev doesn't understand, because what it does is it analyzes that SQL statement that we have, and it tries to make sure that it's a valid SQL statement. Well, if we have something like where we're going to call a stored procedure, WinDev knows nothing about that. So we have to execute that without correction. So it just says, hey, whatever you're sending, you better be right, and I'm going to pass it to the back end. So that's pretty much just a pass-through query that we've got, that we're able to use. Okay? Let me just go back here to get my thoughts again where we're at on here. Oh, join tables. Okay. We'll run this. Let's do a join by link. And I have 2 tables. I have the people table, and one of the fields in there is the state, and it would be NY or CA or CO, as you see here. And then we also have a states table, right? And so what we want to do is be able to pull back the actual state name. Really, you wouldn't be showing both columns, but I just want to show that we have that. Let's go look at this, okay? And join by a link. Okay. So here we have our table control as we normally do. You'll notice that when we go to our link, you can see this, like the col likes is linked to likes. Now if I go to col state 2, so this is the 2-character state that I maintain, okay, and it's linked here. But now what I want to do is I want to be able to go out and I want to be able to get the actual state name. So how we do this is, now instead of being, and if it shows it here as single file, it is now multi-file. Okay, so we start with the column that we're wanting to do the lookup from, supply the value. We select state underscore 2, ILMOFL TX, and then we're going to link it to the states table. Okay, and we're linking the value, the state 2, to the state underscore ID. So in that table, IL is the key for the states table. So that's our link between the two tables. And we're saying, hey, display the actual state itself. Okay, so this would be very similar to creating a SQL statement. They will say, hey, join these two tables. Right, for every record, you're going to have a one-to-one relationship. And there's times that you may not have the state filled in, but this is pretty much what it does. Because the alternate way, which is not good, is you could actually, as you load in each row in the table, you could actually go out and return the state from the table for yourself and populate it there. Not a good idea. Because if you have 1,000 records that you're reading and showing in, that means you have 1,000 back and forth to the database trying to get that record. This is actually doing a join for us to retrieve this this data back. So it's a pretty slick way of doing this. Okay. Let me show you another thing that we do, and this is pretty much a one-to-one where we're showing it. One person, one state. Okay. But what if you had one person, multiple phone numbers? Okay. So let's go look at this one here. Okay. Okay, so let's see what records we have since the, there we go. With any with multiples. I don't even know. You know, we have so many people playing with the training materials, so there's just nothing in there. So let's just go back and grab this one anyway. So if there were multiple numbers, it would show up on the right-hand side. And so let me show you how we're doing this, and this will tie back into how we were doing filtering or querying before. Now, if we take a look at this, this is just our people table. And if we go and look, there's no filtering on this, so all the records are being returned. However, if we look at this table here, right, this is our phones table. Okay, and I'm just showing a description and the phone number in here. And if I look at here, now we're doing an H filter. Now this is a second way of we're doing the H filter. And first of all, I'm deactivating the H filter to clear out anything I ran before. Then I do an H filter, and instead of giving it the SQL statement, I can give it the table name, I can give it the key that I'm looking for, and I can give it the value. And here's where we're talking about if you just refer to the table itself, it's going to give you back the primary key. And so if I come in here, right, and I look at the content, you can see my stored item is the primary key. So this is a way of doing things, and you just need to be careful of what's going to happen in the stored item. Now, as if Andy's saying where you want to use the default so you can do the row coloring, which is great, then make sure you reference the column instead of the stored item. Okay? So that's what's doing our filtering here. But if we look at the table itself, we say every time we have a row selection, in other words, you're going to click on a person, we're going to do table display we're going to redisplay the phones, and we're going to do a TA init, just as if we're initializing this for the first time, which means, hey, every time I select a row in here, run this initialization of the table. And that initialization of the table said, hey, let's take the value that we've got in table people, and we're going to filter the phones on that. So pretty much one line to call it, one line for the filtering, does the lookup for us to show all the one-to-many occurrences of people to phones. Questions? Comments? None at this point?
None at this point.
Okay. I'm not sure how much we want to go through this. I'm not opposed to doing a second class at some point also, because I think maybe we'll take it to the hour mark. But what I'd like to do is whet your appetite for a couple different things in here.
Yeah, that would be great. As many classes as you want, Glenn.
Okay. What I'd like to do is show you how we can build a table on the fly. Now, I need to rework this example because it was the very first thought I had of how to build this in WebDev. Build dynamic table was not available to us in WebDev, so I created it all through code, and there's better ways of doing this. But it is available to us in WinDev. But let's take just a real quick look at this. I'm going to take it from this simple example where I have a table and it knows nothing about the data that I'm going to display in here. And I'm going to return all the fields of a particular table. It doesn't matter what table it is, it will go out and grab it and display it. So this becomes handy, even more so in WinDev because it's a little easier, but this implementation still works and you're free to use it. If you have 100 maintenance tables, for whatever reason you have 100, you don't have to build 100 browse forms to get to your data. You can use this build with the dynamic table. And then you just work on how you're going to build your maintenance form, okay? So this is a nice way to do this. The other thing, and we'll take this to its full conclusion on here, is Andy had built a stored procedure for me that will go out, make sure that and it will return data from 2 tables and return it to us in here. And again, and as you can see, I know nothing about the structure coming back. The stored procedure brings back my fields, and it just builds the table for me. Now, here's where I want to whet your appetite for this. And let's see, run the graphical version of this, because we'd like to take these and keep on extending them to different things that we can do. Okay, we'll run this. Okay, so what I want to do is, now, I'm going to select a table. So what this means is I have now queried my analysis, and I know all the tables I have in my analysis. Okay, so let's just take the people table. And once I select the table, I now can interrogate that table using HListItem, and I can get back all the fields. And in that, I can get back all the field type definitions that we've got for that. And if I execute this, okay, it brings back all my columns in here. But if I say I only want the last name and the likes, I can execute this and bring back just those 2 columns in that data. Well, where this becomes handy, if we think about it, is this now becomes your universal export that you could actually put a filter on here, because you can do a select statement, put a where clause, say what columns you want, and then you can say, okay, here's my data, here's what I want to do, and I want to export it. Okay, so it's just a possibility, but this gives you lots of possibilities of being able to interrogate things and build them on the fly. Okay, and let me move to the next one, so we wrap this up close to the hour. Let's look at, okay. let's look at the okay, where are we at? Oh, we're going to browse. Okay. See if this is going to work. Okay. Now, in the beginning, as you had seen, we had done H filters, and we had our 4 text boxes. We had done a query, and we had our 4, 5, 6 text boxes, fields that we're searching. And I figured there's got to be a better way because I'm getting tired of having to write this every single time. So I came up with this idea. And if I wanted to build a QBE, a query by example. Okay, so now what we did is we built a window that floats on top of here. And you'll notice that every column that we have in our table that is not a calculated field, like full name is calculated. It takes the last name, first name, concatenates them together. So any field that is not conditional or calculated, I actually find out what it is, and I display it in here in our QBE. So then what I do is we have equal to, and let's see if we can find Rathke. Say done. Well, clearly I've got something wrong there, but it does, in its working state, filter everything perfectly. And this is the kind of thing, and I'll make sure that's working for the next presentation. This is the kind of thing that I want you to see of what you can do. It's purely all WX code. There are no black boxes here as such. It's whatever's exposed to us that works. So, oh, and let me just show you one other thing, and we'll get into this later. What I find, there's a couple things that are really cool here. And Andy had talked about rows or columns, the highlighting. And we can look at the code for that the next time, or we can highlight just a cell, we can highlight just a row. And I'm thinking, oh, if we can do this and make it under some condition, wouldn't it be great if we could then instead, let me just return here. Oh, then if we could actually have it do it dynamically. So I was thinking, okay, there's a couple things that we could do. And if you'll notice that this is dark magenta. And so right now what I want to do is I want to make this dark green. Okay. And we'll save this. And I'll go back to company 1. And you'll notice that it now changed colors. And this is W language that we're creating on the fly. We're storing in a database, and we're compiling or running it at runtime. So this is what we call now our business rules, in that you can have some kind of conditional code to do some kind of action based on some kind of value. So yes, it's very generic, but it works really, really well.
Okay, I'm gonna throw one caveat into this, okay, because I ran into this under the current version of WebDev. If you highlight or colorize the cell behind the data and the next select does not fill in that row, it will not clear the color.
If you put -1 in there for the value, I believe it will.
Well,
is that true?
What?
If you make a conditional and you put in -1, it reverts back to the original color. Is that?
No, it's not.
Okay.
The issue is okay, if you scroll down to the last record there,
yeah,
and you made the last record a green down there at the bottom,
yeah,
and then you only selected down to record 620, that last record will still have a green on it, even though you never got that far.
Gotcha.
It does not it does not reinitialize all of the rows on the screen is what happens.
Okay.
When it does its init, it doesn't reinitialize all of them. It'll initialize all the way down and for the number of records you have,
right,
but not all the entire rows. So if I'm on a single page here and the last 2 records I've set to green on that page, and then the next select statement does not fill in the entire page, it'll still show green even though there's no data in there.
Sure. Okay.
It's a browser issue is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I just want to keep that in mind. So a lot of mine on browser, I don't usually colorize the background. I will colorize the text, and it works fine colorizing the text.
And see, that's what's cool here. You just change your code in here that you're storing, right?
Right.
And then you go ahead and execute it. But that's a great pointer, at least to be aware of what's happening or not happening. See,
granted, the only time you have to worry about that is if, you know, in this instance, you're selecting all the names. So feel free to go ahead and do it. It ain't gonna make no difference. But in mine, it's based upon a query each time they highlight a different record. So one may have 3 records, the next one may have 300.
Okay.
So it makes a big difference there.
But see, this is
different type. You know, it's really dependent upon what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. But see, this is a great point that Andy's bringing up. Is Andy, Pete, and I will collaborate on a lot of these things. And this is a perfect example where I've developed, in fact, 2 of these things, the QBE and also the business rules. And these in the straight top-down programming, procedural programming, and both Andy and Pete have taken these to the next level and encapsulate these in their classes. And so they've taken these kinds of things to the next level. So, and at some point they have talked about, and Pete had done a webinar on his business rules and shown how we had taken these.
Pete's out fishing. You know he's out fishing.
I know, but that's why I have to keep on mentioning his name. I should have signed the next webinar to him, but I wouldn't.
All I can say is he better bring us some shark tail.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's it for me for today. And I will be glad to do another webinar and maybe go back through some of this. I'll show the dynamic compiling because there's a couple different ways of doing this, and just to wet everybody's whistle, and from what Andy and I have been working on, take that a little further. Working on a generalized import-export where you select any table that you're working with, you map any columns, and it reads the data and populates your table. So maybe at some point.
On a couple of things here with, you know, the last couple of years we've been working with WINDEV, especially going back and forth with Glenn and myself and Pete. We've kind of figured out that most everything that you think you need to do at low level, you certainly can. All of their internal classes, internal functions, and things that they've done are exposed to you in one way or another. You just got to figure out where they're at and what you need to do with it. Okay? So some of the things that we're doing now have nothing to do with the analysis at all, yet we're able to use the HAD, HModify, and HDelete. And that's some of the things that we're starting to learn and figure out about this. I know that I believe that we're supposed to have Pete next weekend. Is that correct? Tim?
That isn't set in stone yet, but
set in stone. Okay,
he's ready for one.
Yeah, I'm kind of scheduled to be out next Friday, but I'm setting up to be able to start taking people through the beginning to advanced classes. We're going to start with structure and moving forward one step at a time. There's been some indication that people want to do that. And we'll show how to use queries within classes as well as pure selects within classes, and even databases within classes. So we can do this.
Yeah, that's interesting. That'll be good. Well, that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Glenn. I don't see any questions here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Oh, you're welcome.
So your training material is good, so the guys should go for it.
Yeah, they are. They're excellent, and he keeps up with them too. I mean,
That's
it's not
the fantastic part of it.
Yeah, it's, you know, he'll send you updates and stuff with the stuff that he changes, and I've gone back and just and glooged in and stole the base code from Glenn and then reworked it to do what I need to do. So believe me, there's good material in there.
I'm guilty of that too.
If you're not, you're an idiot.
I'm guilty of it too because I forget how I did something and I got to go back and say, how did I do this?
Yeah, we don't believe in that not invented here mode.
Exactly. We like to share.
All right, guys. So yeah, thanks again, Glenn. And as always, the final word goes to the demure and soft-spoken section. Andy.
Y'all be good or be good at it, okay?